Good afternoon. My name is Kidani Kiros. I'm the senior fellow at the Policy Center for the New South in Rabat, Morocco. We are going to start our Atlantic Dialogue talk on what the US election means for the wider Atlantic. Today we have two speakers. Our first speaker will be Professor Lynn Ismail, Senior Fellow, German Marshall Fund of the United States and Policy Center for the New South in Rabat, Morocco. And then we have Special Representative Rita Jo-Lewis, Senior Fellow and Director of Congressional Affairs, German Marshall Fund of the United States. I would like to welcome all of you who are following this talk. So the procedure is that I'll raise some questions to each speaker, and then they will respond to each of the questions that I'm going to raise. I have 4 questions for each of the speakers. Then after, we'll have some time for the audience to raise their questions, and then they will be addressed by both speakers. We'll be staying together for an hour. Then I'm going to start maybe with Professor Lynn Ismail on the first question. Well, Professor Lynn Ismail, given your knowledge of the wider Atlantic, how would you describe this area or this space in general?
Thank you so much, Kidane, colleagues and friends. Another year has gone by, and what a year. For many years, I've looked forward to being in Morocco for the Atlantic Dialogues. Nonetheless, it's good to be able to join you here in this forum. But of course, I look forward to being back in Morocco next year, December. I should start by saying that it's always refreshing to engage in discussions on the topic of the wider Atlantic. The usual focus, as we all know, is usually about the Northern Atlantic. And this is important. After all, what takes place across the Northern Atlantic has profound implications and consequences for the entire world. And if we were to map the traffic across the Atlantic in travel, trade, communications, and more, one would see a dense network of crisscrossing movements all the time, continuously, from east to west and vice versa. Traffic, including trade and travel in the Southern Atlantic, is much less, mainly north and south, following routes born of history and conquest, and very little movement taking place from east to west or across the other way, except what I always say to my African friends, the currents which bring hurricanes from the west coast of Africa to the Caribbean, the occasional flights that link Cuba to Angola, and loads by way of illicit activity, particularly drugs. A German Marshall Fund meeting convened in Miami, November last year, made this point so very clear. The meeting brought together security personnel from Europe, from the United States, from Latin America, Central America, the Caribbean, and Western Africa, and people like myself who are not involved in security, but perhaps geopolitically have interest. And it was astonishing the degree to which colleagues on either side in the Southern Atlantic, on either coast and continent, did not know of each other. They had never collaborated, they'd never exchanged an email. And this is one of the areas that we are going to need to map out and make decisions about how we fix this particular reality. I want to make just a couple of observations against that landscape. The first is that the wider Atlantic incorporates a wide spectrum of countries at different stages of development and scale, ranging from the world's superpower to the tiny islands of the Caribbean, including the world's 6th poorest country, the island of Haiti. It includes parts of Western Africa, such as the country of Mauritania, a vast underpopulated country precariously located in zones of conflict, sandwiched south below Libya and bordered by Mali and the rest of the Sahel. The second observation is, of course, that the wider region encompasses different cultures and histories. We have the colonized in Latin America, the Caribbean, and Western Africa, and the colonial, and I can't pronounce the word, and those who were the ones who colonized those regions from Europe, who also migrated to establish the United States. So power relations between the different regions and within the regions themselves are far from symmetrical. The region is also punctuated by different political systems, ranging from that of Cuba, for example, and the tragedy of failing states such as the serious, tragic situation of Venezuela and the people of Venezuela. And the wider Atlantic is not at all integrated. It's not integrated politically, economically. Interests are divergent and sometimes quite competing. The regional integration exists, for example, CARICOM, OECS in the Caribbean. Trade regimes exist, such as Mercosur, for example. Meaningful integration within the wider space is very limited. And in fact, one could say it's just plain sketchy. Between the Caribbean and Latin America, a regional grouping called CELAC exists, but mainly to form a functional partner for engagement with Europe. But very little takes place by way of engagement within CELAC for the purposes of bringing Latin America and the Caribbean closer together. To fly to South America from the Caribbean, for example, we fly north to Miami, across the Caribbean, south again, to get to Latin America. A couple of flights can be found linking, as I said, Cuba to Angola, for example, South Africa and Brazil, but these are very, very limited and outside of the norm. The Western Hemispheric arrangements exist for dialogue. These are fractious. The Organization of American States, which excludes Cuba, is very much torn over the situation of Venezuela. And the one time I can remember a single-minded focus for the Summit of the Americas, to which all Caribbean and Latin American leaders were committed, was the Sixth Summit of the Americas in April 2012. And I was so fortunate to have been there when all leaders engaged the new president, Obama, on a single issue, that of Cuba, and the need to right a historical wrong on the issue of the embargo. So this broadly is the region to which we speak today. So thank you, Kirin, for allowing me to paint this opening scenario. Kirin, I think your mic is muted.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. Yeah. Thank you, Professor Lin. I would like to forward more or less a similar question to Special Representative Joe-Louise. How do you describe this wider Atlantic from the US perspective?
You know, I think that, well, first of all, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to participate in the Policy Center for the New South's at AD Talks. I agree with Lynn. We would be in Morocco at this time, and we now look forward to being there again. But conversations like this are so dearly needed, so sorely needed for continuation of the bridge that's going to be needed to be extended between the US, Europe, and the wider Atlantic. And so when you mentioned the Summit of the Americas that President Obama did, and the countries came together, I actually participated in the very first Summit of the Americas when Bill Clinton called all of those leaders together. And it really was more about the Americas and the United States. And I think that Lynn, I mean, I can only add a little more of what Lynn already described of it, just adding South America and also adding Africa. But one of the things I think from the Americas perspective is you've seen, especially in the previous administration, and I think you'll see in the upcoming administration of President-elect Biden, that definition will have to be extended broadly. And it's going to have to be extended broadly because all of those countries matter. And they matter a great deal to America. And they are all part and parcel in some form or format in the different multilateral institutions that America will be, I say, not just re-engaging, but have led on for numerous years. So it doesn't matter whether you're talking about countries in Africa that really are strong partners in the African Union, or whether it is countries in South America that make up the countries that Americans have participate in the Western Hemisphere and the Caribbean. You're going to see engagement, I think, across the board in all of those particular nations.
Thank you, Special Representative Joe Lewis. And now I would like to raise a second question to Professor Lin. What does the US elections mean for the wider Atlantic?
You're muted.
Yeah.
Given the divergent interest, Kade, perhaps I could look at different regions and to better express the views that I share with respect of what the elections mean. In the case of Europe, the elections mean reason for hope, but I should say reasons for hope across the world. But in the case of Europe, there is hope that the transatlantic relationship, which has been so fractured, can in fact be mended, that allies will be treated as friends, that the US can play a leadership role in matters of multilateralism once again, rebuilding the WTO, fighting climate change, strengthening NATO, and engaging in a process with other allies in a joint strategy of cooperating with, confronting, and containing China. While African countries engage with the US on the African Growth Opportunity Act, there is a sense that few countries actually benefited. And though America funded in the last 4 years humanitarian assistance and support for refugees, and there was also some engagement on issues related to security and drugs, engagement on development and investment so very needed across the continent has been much less. Africa will have the world's biggest payment system spearheaded by the G20 out of a total of 5.8 billion. America has not yet stepped up to the plate in terms of leadership, which we normally expect from America in any manner with respect of this pandemic, in the way that it did in the 2008 financial crisis, in the way that it led on HIV, and the way in which it supported multilateral efforts to deal with Ebola. But there is every reason to hope, given pronouncements by incoming President-elect Biden, that America is going to be back.
Thank you, Professor Lin. And now I will go to Special Representative Joe Lewis. I would like to raise the following question. You know, given the current trend in foreign policy, do you think that the US is slowly but surely retreating from multilateralism? And what do you think? Do you think that there will be any change in foreign policy with upcoming administration?
Then, thank you. That is the question, I think, of the day for America's foreign policy. I think that there are going to be words that we're going to hear a lot coming from others that are going to be working with the United States, as well as words coming from the Americans that will be working with their allies and friends, and that is cooperation and collaboration. We have seen that have come through in the United States a very divided country. We've come through a very divided and polarized electorate. But what we have come out on the other side to see with a new administration and a new Congress is that President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris have, along with their colleagues in the United States House of Representatives, with a new chairman, Gregory Meeks, who has been a longtime friend of Europe and has recently, in his ranking membership role on House Foreign Affairs, of which now he chairs, he was also a major friend of the Western Hemisphere and countries in Africa. I think you will also see on the Senate side, with people like whether it's Senator Murphy and others, who all agree that it is time for a significant amount of aggressive re-engagement. But we cannot be remiss of thinking that there still isn't somewhat of an undercurrent of isolationism, running through the American public. And some of that really kind of, I think, comes by the frustrations that, Americans had with the, final drawdown of the military campaign in Iraq and Afghanistan. You saw just a lot of confusion in America about how Americans view globalization and free trade. You saw in the summer, the anger, all of that anger coupled with the racial resentment and the issues that played out in the American streets around systemic racism. It really led, I think, a lot of American voters, which was going in the direction of America's first. But now you're seeing that even still, I think in a recent study that, from the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, it said 30%, the Americans believe that we should be staying out of the world. 35 world affairs, 35% of Americans believe that globalization has been bad. However, I think it would be unwise to think that just because we are in some dire circumstances in some forms from our economy and the pandemic problems that we're facing here in America, I still say the outlook looks really good. I do not see a continued retreat from I believe it is definitely reversible. And it is reversible because of the types of not only the election of Vice President Biden, but also because of the individuals that he has designated as his nominees, meaning Tony Blinken, who is a devout multilateralist. You have, as the next Secretary of State, you have Jake Sullivan, who recently has also had some writings and the work that he's been doing around multilateralism. And then, of course, you have the nomination of Linda Thomas Greenfield, who is a career diplomat and an Africa hand, who basically said, the era for multilateralism starts now. But I think for all of it, it's about how the new administration is going to have to be very clear to the American people about what is going to be the benefit for engaging in the world. And so with that benefit, you have, the biggest cheerleader, which will be Joe Biden. He is a major believer in alliances. He's a major believer in the work that we have done over decades in our multilateralism. multilateral institutions. You understand that he nominated a former secretary.
Okay, maybe, yeah, I think it's a connection problem. Maybe Professor Lin, I can raise the next question until the connection with the Special Representative Joe Lewis is okay. So the third question that I would like to raise is, what are the key pressing issues that requires multilateral mobilization in the wider Atlantic?
Well, Kadain, I think that the question really is, what does the agenda look like in the wider Atlantic? And I think we need to look at these at two levels: the priorities of the different regions, and those around which there's some degree of convergence on the international agenda. Now, if we take a look at Latin America and the Caribbean, I think there's urgent need for genuine diplomacy to arrive at a solution for the tragedy of Venezuela and its people, and the instability which this has caused within Latin America and the Caribbean. Cuba, there is hope that the gains in the relationship made by the Obama administration can in fact be rebuilt. We need an agenda for investments and jobs, especially for youth, to break the stranglehold of drug cartels, and joint programs in the Southern Atlantic on intelligence sharing for drugs and security. Africa too needs some of the same things: development, trade, jobs, investment, security, support for its own integration, reversal of travel bans against certain groups. And on the global agenda, we desperately need a multilateral approach to engineering the economic recovery globally with respect of the pandemic, introducing innovation in the response to the debt of poorer countries. Example, the Brady bonds that were in fact used following the collapse of Latin American economies in the early 2000s allowed illiquid debt to be transformed into bonds, and those helped to shore up Latin American economies. We need to support the IMF's special drawing rights with benefits to countries most in need, work on the Paris Accord and climate change and building resilience, shoring up globalization, free trade and open markets, fixing the ills within modern democratic societies. And I think this is going to be one of the major challenges that's going to require a multilateral approach, ensuring inclusion, lessening inequality, building bridges between the rich and the poor, bridging the divide between rural and urban places that we saw in the last elections in the United States, increasing the attractiveness of democracy as a world model and making it work for all. Thank you, Kadain.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you so much.
Yes, I think I lost
Representative, yes, Joe Lewis, you can continue from where.
What I was also saying, I'm sorry, I
it's okay.
Second is that we also will see, I believe, in a new administration how Tony Blinken will move very aggressively about revamping the State Department and the civil service and the foreign service community there that has really not been in the central part of the previous administration. But one of the things that I think no one is under an illusion is that this will not be very hard work. And the hard work is one I think that others will be supportive of what the United States is looking to do. And so that we will be able to end that isolation period. But the most important thing of all of this is about the American voter. They're going to be the determining factor, I believe, major player in the future of how we look at America's foreign policy. And one of the things I think when you define public, you're going to have to also include our state and local leaders who have played a significant role in this absence of retiring from America from some of the major accords that we have signed in the past. I think congressional leaders are going to be exceptionally important moving forward in a Biden era. Biden-Harris era, the private sector, and definitely our non-governmental organizations. I think it's really going to be a time not only for a whole of government approach, but it's also going to be a time for an era of engagement for all Americans, which will definitely include the American public, to be a part of how we move forward and look at our foreign policy.
Thank you. Maybe let me raise one follow-up question, which is related with what you said. What are the key pressing issues regarding this multilateral mobilization? And again, from the US perspective, and then how do you think the upcoming US administration will address and tackle the issues and the challenges?
Well, one of the things we always have to start with the fact that currently right now, before this, the elections in Georgia for the United States Senate, with the election of Biden and Harris, and with the continuation of the House of Representatives being in the hands of Democrats, is that with the Senate being in the hands of the Republicans, the opposition, you're going to see divided government. And so with that divided government, that's going to be a determining factor, I believe, in how America moves forward and how we deal with some of these issues. But if you take it from President Biden's perspective as the president-elect, controlling the COVID-19 pandemic and how we distribute the vaccine is the paramount issue of the day. It is something that he talked about continuously throughout the campaign, and he talked about that from the day he has been certified as the president of the next president of the United States, and how he has also been working with his priorities of naming the health officials and also naming the task force on the coronavirus. But also coupled with that, you notice that he named his economic team, because there has been significant economic fallout from the pandemic. We see 40% of minority-owned businesses are out of business. We see the workforce adding millions to the roll on a monthly basis. We see people who are in largely in underserved communities really don't have the tools they need to stay competitive. So one of the things that is reassuring, I believe, to some of to people in the American people, and why President Biden was successful, him and Vice President-elect Harris, was how he has said not only tackling the pandemic from the healthcare perspective, but he really will have an eagle's eye on the economic perspective. And you see the naming of Janet Yellen, a long-term Federal Reserve hand, to calm the markets, to know that he has a serious partner there from an economic perspective. And then the other issue, of course, is going to be climate change. Climate change, when America stepped away from the Paris Climate Accords, as they say, for many of us who had worked on those types of agreement, that was like a little dark day. But we see some sunshine on the horizon. And I think those who are in the accord are going to be welcoming John Kerry and as the special envoy for the president-elect, as well as the president himself. And then, of course, you would be remiss from the security side if you didn't also talk about NATO. How are we going to be players in an alliance that has been one of the most important ones for America? I think you will see that America truly engaged in NATO. There will be hard conversations, but there will be one done with the matter of fact of how we have shared our values and about the way that we respect one another in the way that we deal. But then also, as we look at the wider Atlantic, what is going to be the most difficult of those, whether it's the COVID pandemic and distributing the vaccine, how we deal with economic fallout, how we look at climate change. I think people in the wide Atlantic, our friends, will find agreement on those. The big issue that's going to be difficult is how we look at China, the China challenge. How are we going to address that, especially when Americans in Europe see it one way, and you may have those in South America and Africa viewing the China challenge in entirely, from an entirely different perspective. And so when you see China, who has going around in the developing countries offering financial aid offering support, minus, of course, no discussions around human rights. That automatically tells you the difficult conversation that's going to be taking place between US and Europe, as well as what's going to be happening from that perspective. You look at our, I would say that many believe that Vice President Biden, based on some of the things that his task force is coming out with, will be successful in trying to control the COVID-19 situation here in the United States, because he's going to speak with one voice for the U.S. How he controls the fallout on the economy, of speaking with one voice with his Secretary of the Treasury. And so one of the things that you will also see is the fact that he will speak and work very hard on a bilateral approach. And that is really going to be exceptionally important. How he will offer an open hand to his colleagues, his former colleagues in the Senate, working with bipartisan members who may disagree with him, but because he has a history of how he has consulted with men and women on both sides of the aisle, I think he would be looking for some great partnerships and collaborations with those members in the Senate.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Special Representative Julius. And now, Professor Lin, this will be the last question from my side before we start to address some of the questions that are raised from our audience. So how can countries in the wider Atlantic can renegotiate an inclusive framework of cooperation and partnership?
Thank you, Kadain. I think a lot of the success of such an approach is going to depend heavily on American re-engagement at the global, hemispheric, and I would say regional levels as well. And America's support in multilateral cooperation in responding meaningfully to the staggering levels of developing country debt as a result of the pandemic, cooperating with the United Nations and its associated agencies, leading the charge in selling democracy, not only abroad, but again at home, an America that treats other countries in the world with, once again, dignity and respect, is going to regain much ground that has been lost. There are, however, caveats, and just a few concluding observations from me on this one. The truth is that in the intervening 4 years, the world has changed, America has changed, its allies have changed, its enemies have gained strength. The incoming US administration has a lot by way of distractions at home and many things which need to be fixed. And I think Rita Jo has already spoken eloquently to what many of these challenges are going to be. The 78 million or so Americans who voted for the Biden presidency have huge expectations regarding the systemic ills and injustices which need attention and need attention urgently. The 70+ million who voted for President Trump and the ugliness of the electoral period and its aftermath, which all of us across the world have witnessed, speak to the depth of the division, the rise of nationalism, and the fragility of democracy within the country. And these are going to take real hard efforts for the incoming administration at home. And of course, the recovery efforts socially and economically coming out of this pandemic within the United States are going to require lots by way of resources in time and material assets. There's also a growing sense, which we have been feeling even before the advent of the Trump administration, a growing sense that Americans want their governments to focus more on the well-being and welfare of what's happening at home, rather than tending to putting out fires around the world and being the police of the rest of the world. Across the Atlantic, Europe itself is distracted by internal and external threats to its very existence. It is looking down the barrel at a looming demographic crisis. It is aging, it's aging rapidly. At stake, it's future prosperity and the quality of European life. As we speak, the final days of a long-standing relationship with the United Kingdom are coming to an end. China has made inroads into the heart of Europe through its model of influence by investments. And indeed, today, China now faces the United States on the coast of two great oceans, on the Pacific, and now through its investment right onto the coast of the Atlantic. Populism is on the rise, and the Chancellor of Germany, perhaps the most respected leader in Europe, is facing her last months as a very steady pair of hands at the helm of leadership across Europe. Now, Europe has been very quick to swear allegiance to the incoming presidency and to the principles which have long defined the transatlantic relationship. But it is very much aware that issues of its own security, things have also changed. And even with a new administration, matters pertaining to big tech, aircraft and subsidies, trade tariffs remain to be discussed and unpicked. America's allies have arrived at the uncomfortable truth that they must safeguard their own interest, as they have also sought to diversify their alliances. And this may be very hard to roll back. But the truth is, there's still much more that the two sides of the Atlantic have in common than separates them. And the Biden presidency is going to be working on those areas of convergence. And last, there is a sense that bundles of economic and political power are shifted from west to east. America's retreat emboldened China and to a host of other regional and great powers, including Russia and Turkey, and others lie in the wings. And in the tussle for power and dominance between China and the United States, the rest of the world, including Latin America, Europe, and Africa, and indeed Asia itself, do not intend, nor do they wish to be squeezed. It is not in their interest to be forced to pick sides, because too many interests today are now bundled. It is really and truly into this geopolitical landscape that Biden's presidency will now commence. There's a lot to do, but I echo Rita Jo's sentiments that there's a new mood on the horizon, a new sense of optimism, and there's every reason to be hopeful for the future and the benefits of this new presidency.
Thank you, Professor Lynn Ismail. And now, Special Representative Joe-Louis. One more question from my side again. Considering what you discussed in responding the previous questions, do you think that the US should renegotiate an inclusive framework for cooperation with countries in the wider Atlantic? If yes, how can the US should renegotiate?
I think you raise a very difficult questions. I think you'll see President-elect Biden and many European leaders are going to be keen to build such frameworks. And then you're going to see many countries throughout South Atlantic and others may be somewhat hesitant. Some of that kind of goes to the fact of they're going to be looking at this most recent iteration of America's foreign policy and think, can that be believed? Or was that a moment in time, or is that moment over? However, I think, and then the other thing they'll be looking at, if America is a party to these frameworks, will the next US president just kind of come along and not, participate in these? But I think, the real question is how are we going to address these issues? And many of the issues of which Lynn, so she just even extended more out, not only on the issues of US, Europe, and the Atlantic, but also not only from the China challenge, and I totally agree with you, Lynn, Turkey, look as well as on the Russia front. Most Americans, as you've seen time and time again, who have been in the voting population, is really continuing to look for stability and peace. And I think stability and peace is what all of citizens around the world, not just in the US and Europe and the Atlantic, but all citizens are looking for. But one of the things that is very clear, it is true, the world has changed, America has changed, its partners and allies have changed. And so you're going to have to see that our multilateral institutions that America helped to build, America helped to lead, are going to be one, I believe, that will be respected in this new iteration of the foreign policy and the new defense team that the Vice President Biden, now President-elect, has just announced in the general. General Lloyd Austin, who, as you can see in his background, has been one who has been heavily engaged in diplomacy as well as in multilateral institutions. And so I think what you're going to see is individuals who have a deep appreciation for countries in Western Hemisphere, countries in Africa, who have been our friends and have been our allies, and those who have or who have sought America's support. And so with that support is going to be, how is that going to, kind of bear itself out? Will it come in the sense of aid, or will come in the sense of investments? And so when you look at America at home having all the problems that we have from an economic perspective, that's where a lot of the conversation or the tension might go, not only with the Republican Party, but also within our own party or within the president's-elect's own party. But I believe that the Secretary of State, Mr. Blinken, Tony Blinken, and President-elect Biden have been really clear that, we need to, going to have to be creative. We're going to have to be diligent. We're going to have to be one to show the strong possibilities of what it means for America to be involved and that it can be trusted. I think he'll have a very strong partner in Chairman Meeks, who says not only do we need to focus on Europe, but to focus also on Africa and Latin America, and to also do it in a very from a lot more emphasis on on diplomacy. Diplomacy, not only country to country, but also diplomacy with the regional institutions and with multilaterals such as the African Union. I think previously you saw that President-elect Biden was very supportive of what President Obama did with the young African leaders. I see some conversations now talking about how you expand those programs, how even in America, it's not just the American citizens, but also how do you work with the Africa diaspora right here in the United States, which can be a big player and partner in educating the American people as to why involvement in these institutions will be important. I think Vice President has already, President-elect Biden has already met with the private sector on a whole host of issues, of course, starting out with the pandemic and the vaccine distribution. But mobilizing the private sector is going to be important, because we also will have to prioritize how we look at all of our different relationships. We're going to have to be continuing to talk about improving security and rule of law issues. But at the end of the day, having a partner or an ambassador like Greenfield, when she's confirmed, to show that not just that the UN is moving forward with the EU, or that but that EU Commission is looking at places like Africa's partnerships, but what are going to be the partnerships that America itself will have, and how do we bring all of these players along that we have the great relationships to be a part of.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So we are left with about 15 minutes before we wrap up our discussion. We have some questions from the audience, so I'll read some of the questions, maybe one by one, and then either one of you or both of you, you'll respond to the questions. So the first question is, the US focus on security interests and free markets has come at the expense of creative and more productive approaches that could deepen ties with African governments what will be the new EA's policy towards Africa? I'm trying to actually modify some of the questions. Yeah.
I mean, what I can say that I have seen and what I have heard President Biden-elect Biden talk about is that it will be one of mutual respect and trust. It will be one whereby partnerships are not going to be. It's a necessity for us to work within institutions like the African Union and others on all of the issues that are going to be confronting the continent. I think you see in the selection, like I said, of the recent selection of General Austin, who has a history in Africa, Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, and then Linda Greenfield, UN, who's an Africa hand. I think you can be assured that the Vice President, not only from his own fundamental beliefs, but that his new team will be offering advice as to how that engagement can be done in a manner that shows that America is going to continue to be engaged in the continent, because it is an important continent, and also to be bringing along the private sector with that, as he has done previously throughout his career.
Thank you so much. Professor Lin, do you have something to say on this particular issue, particular question?
Not at all, thank you.
Okay. So the second question is, what could be one big win that would build positive momentum in the US-African relationship? Maybe Professor Lin?
Oh, okay. I think that Joe would probably, Rita Joe would be.
Okay.
No, but I will just say that, I mean, let's face it, Africa needs a lot by way of investments. So anything that deals with the challenges of development that Africa right now faces, particularly with respect of creating jobs for young people, would go a long way towards meeting Africa's own objectives for itself.
The only thing to add to that is that I think the only thing I can add is what she said, is that youth bulge of the how young the men and women are on the continent. And they are the future, they are the leaders now, and they're the future leaders to come, and will be the ones that will be looking for to partner on issues around entrepreneurship and innovation and all of the new technologies. And that's why I think, programs and efforts, big initiatives like Young African Leaders, where you bring them in working with Americans, not just in the country, but also, across throughout the wider Atlantic, is so important. And I think that's why working with organizations like the Policy Center for the New South has been really on the forefront in working and bringing in the new young talent, spotlighting what that looks like, understanding and hearing what they are, and talking about showcasing issues, not just about aid for Africa, but also trade for Africa and investment for Africa, and investing in issues around small business and entrepreneurship. I think though women-owned businesses are going to be very important. And if America can offer up some of those initiatives that have been done in some previous Democratic administrations, I think that can also be concerned about what's happening here in the United States.
Thank you so much. Well, the next question that we got from our audience is that, how should the United States and Europe create the necessary changes and make the alliance resistant to future shocks? Who would like to respond to this question?
I probably think we both will, but
okay.
I think that, I mean, let's face it, Europe has been a long-standing ally of the United States. And together they have stood the test of time with respect of forming the very heart of the Western liberal alliance that has presided over at least 70, 75 years of shared prosperity and values and open markets and globalization and trade that have lifted billions out of poverty. But relationships are also personality driven. And it is very interesting to see the way in which a relationship that has been so resilient and so strong has been so decimated in so many ways by character and personality. And I think this is a lesson that Europeans are going to take and hold on to, even whilst they appeal to the spirit of engagement and resurgence and rebuilding that is coming out of the promise of the new administration. The fact is, there's so many things that Europe has tried to do on its own in the last 4 years that simply defy its ability to make very good traction on. One, for example, was once the United States pulled out of the agreement on Iran, for example. The US, Europe promised Iran, together with other partners, that they would hold the fort and hold the line and provide support to Iran. But ultimately, they could not provide the sort of support that Iran had hoped for, simply because the sanctions imposed on by America once they moved out of the agreement were sanctions that Europe, with all of its generosity, all of its spirit, could not handle alone. They were unable to put in place any sort of replica financing arrangements that would have assisted Iran. And the same is true with engagement with China. China can only be cooperated with and engaged with and confronted when needed, if needed, or Russia, with a united front. So that I think that Europe understands very much that its place in the world, even though Europe is an economic superpower in its own right, it's got 550 million people, one of the largest and richest markets in the whole world, but it has never had the appetite for the political heft on the global stage. To be part of that political clout, it needs to be a partner with America. So I think on all sides is a real understanding of the need to engage, the benefits of engaging, the cost of not engaging, and the will to engage, and also how lonely it is to have to go alone.
Thank you, thank you, Professor Lynn. Yes, Special Representative Jolie.
Picking up on Lynn's comments, I think people have to be reminded, as Americans have to be reminded, that together, the US and Europe, it's our largest trading partner. And when you look at the numbers that impact jobs and our competitive sectors in America, you know it's going to be a partner that will have a major open hand by this new administration. I believe that what we've seen so far from Vice President-elect Biden is how important diplomacy is going to play in throughout the work of his administration and as to foreign policy. But the foundation of the relationship between the United States and Europe is one that I believe can withstand the test of time. We see, as we go into a new era very shortly with the swearing in and inauguration of a new president, what he and his team have said about how we as countries have had, we share values, and we are about the business of working collaboratively together and in cooperative partnerships. I believe that you will continue to see America, it's not just that America is back. We understand the issues that we're going to be confronted with. We understand, I believe, from an American perspective, I think the administration does, of what reform in all of these institutions. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about any of the ones that Americans have been a part of. And so it's not that you just want to come back and say, you know, you can't just march back in and say we're back. It's going to take some hard work. It's going to take some serious diplomacy between those that represent America. The other thing is that we know that the American citizens, as I said before, you know, we used to say, everybody can be a diplomat. All you got to do is press send, because we're, you know, we are now connected to each other by technology 24/7. And so that's why the voices of the American people have risen up and is very loud. And no matter whether it is divided, we saw that the electorate chose Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. But what they, I believe, chose was that to have an America that was in partnership with others, not an America that goes alone, which we have never done in the past. And also an America that is going to have to look at all the new tools that that will be used for as friend or foe, and also how we work with our young people, not only here in America but around the world, because that is the next test of time. And then because we are in an era where Vice President Biden chose a woman of color, an African American woman of South Asian descent, it will be important for that role model around the world that America has never shown before. And what will all of that looks like? And so the foundation is strong. And I think that, as they say, the foundation is strong and the hand is open. And it should be very, using Lynn's word, should be very hopeful for not just people abroad, but also for Americans.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We are left only with 2 minutes. I'll give you 1 minute each. The last question is, can you discuss the new administration's leadership or approach to great power competition with Russia? Maybe 1 minute each, or yes, please.
I'm gonna let Lynn handle that. She was the ambassador working on those.
Okay.
Lynn.
Oh, thank you, Rita Jo. Well, I think that the new administration is coming in open-eyed to the many threats to security and democracy around the world. Russian foreign policy has been mainly opportunistic. Russia has been roaming not just within its own regional sphere of influence, but wherever the opportunity arises, whether it's the Middle East, as we saw in Syria, North Africa, as we've seen engagement with Libya, and as far as South America, with Venezuela, and of course, long-standing ties with Cuba. So I think that at least we can expect a US-Russian engagement which is certain, where there is no uncertainty about the relationship on either side. And in fact, there's speculation that in fact the Russian president might in fact even be looking forward to having the certainty of what he expects a Biden presidency will bring, but also engagement, because there are treaties between the two powers that require renegotiation dealing with nuclear arsenals starting from February next year. And Vice President Biden has already said, we're going to be doing those things. So I think it will be frank and honest and fair engagement. And I think that will be better for everybody.
Well, the only thing I'd like to add is that when you threaten America's democracy, anyone, America is always going to be fighting back. I think you're not going to have a better defender of our democracy than this new president and his team and the administration. I think not only will you get that certainty, I think you will get strong, you will get tough, you will see an America that will not take a backseat to anyone who threatens our security, the American citizens' security, or threaten our democracy. And so I would agree that because this administration's team is about engagement, it would be interesting to see how that engagement begins to take shape.
Thank you so much, Special Representative Joe Lewis and Professor Lynn. Thank you so much for your insightful intervention. Personally, I enjoyed it. Hopefully our audiences have enjoyed your intervention, rich experience. We have got a lot of things from what you said. And hopefully we'll have similar discussions in the future. And then on behalf of the organizer, the Policy Center for New South in Rabat, Morocco, I would like to thank the speakers and of course the audience who showed up for this discussion. Thank you so much. I think we have to wrap up here. It's time to wrap up. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.